Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Box Office Talk. This is the show where I break down what happened at the box office, see if my predictions for the top 5 are correct, then make predictions for next week's top 5. So let's get right on into it. Last week I predicted that number 1 would be Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, number 2 would be Gillman, Teenage Kraken, number 3 would be Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, number 4 would be Elemental, and number 5 would be The Flash. And yeah, I unfortunately only got 1 out of 5 of my predictions right for this weekend, and yes, it's the obvious one, but even the obvious one is, there's something interesting to talk about with that, so let's get right on into it. I did check the comments, and, there are some people who are, a lot of variety of guesses, which were all appropriate, and yeah, I was probably a little too nice with my prediction for Gillman, but then again, so are all of you too, because it didn't even crack the top 5. So, let's go over what actually happened in the overall top 10. Number 1 was Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Of course, you open with a big IP movie, it's probably going to be number 1 unless it's like really fucking awful, it probably will be. But I think the most interesting thing to talk about here is the fact that it only opened on a budget of $300 million, by the way. This budget is so fucking huge. It's literally like larger than all of the other ones, you know what I mean? Like the highest one, I believe, before this was Kingdom of the Crystal Skull at 185 million, and this is 300 million. This movie opened with $60 million. That's just domestically. Worldwide, only $130 million. Now, the chances of it doubling that $300 million budget are actually not that great with an opening like that. I mean, you all just saw what happened with The Flash opening around the same with this worldwide, you know what I mean? Like, I really do hate to say this, especially in its only opening week, like it's only weekend right now, in release, and I don't know if it's going to have any staying power of any kind. I think the fact that it only opened at 60, and when I went to see the movie on a Friday night, the theater was, it had some people in it. It was not jam-packed, definitely not jam-packed enough to justify a $300 million budget. With Mission Impossible right around the corner and Barbie and Oppenheimer, the movies that people have been really hyping up for this summer, especially for the month of July, people are probably just going to wait for that. I think it's safe to say this movie is not going to profit. It's probably not going to hold over that well. I think it might be fine next weekend. We'll get to that with the predictions, of course, but this is a fucking dud of an opening, especially for like what was hyped up as like, this is the final Harrison Ford Indiana Jones film, probably, the last Indiana Jones film ever made. You can't do it without Ford. And it's just going out with a complete thud, and the word of mouth, as far as like the numbers you see on Rotten Tomatoes, the critic score 60s, it was bumped up, but the con reaction initially, that stigma probably has lasted for a while, because that's all people had seen for a while was that splat in the 50s, and the audience scores obviously in the 80s. I think it's literally the same as The Flash. Critic scores now in the 60s and audience is 80s, but it's just very divisive, you know what I mean? Like, so many people have been talking about it, and there isn't like a big strong sense of like, you gotta go see it. You will see people say that, but then it's contrasted with, it's so bad, you know what I mean? And then people who are like, it's just kind of whatever, I wouldn't recommend going out to see it right away, I don't think it's awful, but blah blah blah, it's got opinions all across the board. So I really don't think a staying power is really going to help this film, you know what I mean? As far as its opening weekend, it is the second highest for Indiana Jones, but it's 40 million behind Crystal Skulls. So it can't even it can't even top what Crystal Skull did back in 2008. As far as James Mangold, it is his second highest opening, which is 28 million behind what Logan did. So, this is kind of the movie that people were saying like, oh, well, he got the job for this indie film probably mostly because of Logan, an older kind of hero, blah, blah, blah. People have listed the comparisons before. You all know what that is. And, this was probably going to be looked at as like, if anyone's going to top, Logan's opening weekend, it probably would be Indiana Jones, and it can't even do that, like, there you go, as far as that goes. For James Mangold's filmography, obviously it has outgrossed a lot of his other films. It's outgrossed Heavy by 60 million, Copland by 16, Girl Interrupted by 32 million, Kate and Leopold by 13 million, Identity by 8 million, and 310 to Yuma by 7 million, and it is behind Night and Day by 16 million. Obviously, it's not going to drop off completely and not make that 16 million. It's going to do that. It's only real competition at that point. It'll be interesting to compare it to the runs of Logan and the Wolverine, And I guess Ford v Ferrari too. It obviously has a strong chance of outgrossing that one, but just like, you know, James Mangold hasn't had like, you know, a career akin to Spielberg, where all of his movies are like, man, these are all great financial runs, and it's going to be interesting to compare. It's just, you know, he's had a lot of good moderate hits, and this one, because it's an IP, obviously is going to, you know, just wipe the board with a lot of them, even if some of them are better than this. So yeah, it's going to make its way up, but I will be curious to see how it drops off and then where it ends up in his entire filmography. For the Indiana Jones films, it still needs 119 million until it outgrosses Temple of Doom's domestic run. On the worldwide side of things, it needs 203 million until it outgrosses Temple of Doom. And then as far as James Mangold's filmography, it is 130 million over Heavy, 67 million over Copland, 82 million over Girl Interrupted, 60 million over Kate and Leopold, and 42 million over Identity. And it is 59 million over 310 to Yuma, and now needs 57 million until it outgrosses Walk the Line's entire worldwide run. So yeah, like I keep saying with all these movies, you know, it'll be more interesting to talk about on the second weekend, but if I'm going to be completely honest, I think it's safe to say that, you know, it's not going to, if it does manage to hold over surprisingly well next weekend, I think it'll be just by the slimmest amount, and then once Mission Impossible comes into play, you know, it's done. You know what I mean? I just think there's a lot of hype over how Tom Cruise and Christopher McQuarrie, that entire team, are making their movies, and especially Mission Impossible, and just how everything is so exciting surrounding the, you know, practicality to the action sequences, and then you compare that to how a lot of people are viewing these action scenes in the newest Indiana Jones films. And Indiana Jones, at least the original trilogy, that's kind of like defined a lot of people's view on what a good action movie should be. Any one of those three films. So to have this one, and the topic of conversation is it awful or is it just okay? No one is saying great when it comes to the action. So I think that kind of says enough, you know, kind of a depressing final outing for old Indy. Let's move on to number 2, which is Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. In case you were all worried, it is still doing well, making 11.5 million, adding to a domestic total of 339 million. So that's 5 million over the run of Spider-Man Homecoming and 3 million over the run of Spider-Man 3 domestically, and now needs 34 million until it outgrosses Spider-Man 2. Worldwide, it is now sitting at 607 million, so 6 times its $100 million budget, or if it truly is 150 million like some other reports have indicated, that's 4 times its budget, but even then, that's still a profit and it doesn't matter. It's still behind The Amazing Spider-Man 2 worldwide, but, you know, with the way it's holding over amidst all these movies that are just coming and going, flopping, not connecting with anybody, it could catch up to that pretty quickly. It only needs 101 million to do that at this point. So let's move on, because I really don't have anything else to add to Spider-Man, because, you know how much I love this movie. It's doing fantastically at the box office. So let's move on to number 3, which is Elemental. We're going back to the duds. We're back to box office dud talk. This one, though, this weekend was actually pretty damn close to Across the Spider-Verse, similar to last weekend. You know, these movies are kind of neck and neck. I don't think there's a reality where Elemental ever does, you know, overtake Spider-Verse, but it's pretty damn close right now. It made 11.3 million this weekend, adding to a domestic total of 88 million. It is still behind the domestic run of Lightyear by 30 million. Worldwide, though, it is sitting at 186 million, so it is overtaken Onward by 53 million, and now needs 32 million until it gets to Lightyear. So it's inching closer to the lowest grossing Pixar films, which is, you know, pretty solid, I guess, for this movie that is by, you know, all means a flop. And sure, it's having a pretty solid hold compared to like something like The Flash, and the fact that, you know, it has held this well instead of completely dropping off, and it's not going to get the Ruby Gillman treatment. We'll talk about that in a second. You know, that's obviously, you know, pretty surprising, but they still haven't even crossed over the threshold of 200 million yet, which is what the initial production budget is, and they need to double that in order to be considered a success. And for a lot of these bigger movies, you actually need a bit more. So yeah, it's just still not looking good, but it's just surprising that it's clinging on for dear life so much, you know what I mean? Let's move on to number 4, which is No Hard Feelings, another one that is clinging on. It only had like a exact 50% drop, and it's literally in the same slot it was in last weekend, so this had a pretty solid hold. It made 7.5 million, adding to a domestic total of 29 million, so now that places it 54 million behind the domestic run of Good Boys, the director's previous film. Worldwide, it is sitting at 49 million, so that's 62 million behind the worldwide run of Good Boys. So, you know, still not close to that, and they still need about 41 million until they double their initial production budget of 45 million. This whole, it's pretty solid for a second weekend. It's not terrific. Exact 50% is like, okay, better than what it could have been. It's better than The Flash, but it's still, I think it'll just be interesting to see how it even compares next weekend when you have a new comedy like Joyride coming out as well. It'll be interesting to see like which one had maybe the better outreach to the audience as far as like marketing wise, like which one is getting the attention the most. So we will see how it fares in that way. Maybe there's a reality where, it still does well and Joyride does well, or No Hard Feelings just completely drops off the map and Joyride really takes off, or neither of them take off. I don't know. Let's move on to number 5, which is Transformers Rise of the Beast, making 7.0 million, adding to a domestic total of 136 million, and domestically it has finally outgrossed Bumblebee by 9 million and Transformers The Last Knight by 6 million, and now needs 109 million until it outgrosses Age of Extinction. There's no way in hell that's happening, but I think, at the very least, it's outgrossed the last 2 installments, at least domestically, so I think that's at least interesting to see as far as like a statistic you would bring up if you wanted to fight for the case of greenlighting a sequel to this. Worldwide, it is sitting at 379 million, so not only is that still 86 million behind the worldwide run of Bumblebee, which is the lowest grossing Transformers film worldwide, but it still is inching away from doubling its $200 million budget, so 21 million until it gets there, which is, I'm not sure how many other places it needs to be released and if that will be enough to really bump it up, but even if it does, I think, the fact that it has outgrossed some of the lower grossing ones domestically, that's at least a solid sign that, like I said, there is a way that you can get people back into the theater for this. I think maybe there are just some things, about the film. You can maybe find a way to bump up the critic score on Rotten Tomatoes, not pay people off, but like make a better film that would, maybe cater to people who are like, hey, I just want a good movie and this is that, you know what I mean? Because I can understand why people, I enjoyed it. I thought it was decent. I can understand why some people would be like, I prefer Bumblebee, you know what I mean? And that's another thing to talk about. That's a cheaper film, and this one is exactly 200 million. That is quite the big gamble for something coming off of something that was like, okay, Last Night didn't do it for us. There's waning interest in the series. We need to get across that we're redoing this, and Bumblebee was a modest hit with the budget it had and the overall run. Quite a big gamble to go with a $200 million movie at that point. But, hey, maybe in the next couple weeks, if it releases in any other locations, it'll bump it up significantly enough, but I don't know. Let's move on to number 6, which is Ruby Gillman, Teenage Kraken. Man, poor DreamWorks, they had a huge win with Puss in Boots a couple months ago, and now they're just dumping this one and kind of leaving it to dry. This is not the same case, by the way. This is not going to be something that will, hold on for dear life like Puss in Boots did and have really strong word of mouth. The word of mouth for this is kind of like, it's fine, you know what I mean? Like, for kids, it's fine. Puss in Boots was kind of like a universal thing of like, oh yeah, kids will love it and the families are going to love it as well. So yeah, and, upon seeing the film, it feels like, it as far as story-wise, it feels like an Illumination film. Feels like Illumination wrote it, you know what I mean? The way they kind of take narrative shortcuts to keep run times low and also costs low. The budget for this is only $70 million. So it doesn't, I don't think, I wouldn't recommend it, you know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't really recommend it to anybody, for kids, yes, but like to anyone who's like, I just want to see a good movie that just so happens to be an animated film that maybe kids are more likely to see, I would recommend Puss in Boots, The Last Wish, or the first one, whichever one. This movie only made 5.2 million, and this is the lowest DreamWorks opening weekend ever. It still needs 21 million until it can outgrow Sinbad, one of the earlier DreamWorks films, and who knows if it can even have a hold like that to make that. Worldwide, it is only at $12 million, and they need 30 million to outgross the other lowest, earning worldwide DreamWorks film, Spirit Untamed, from a couple years ago. So not looking good for Ruby Gillman, Teenage Kraken, or DreamWorks, you know what I mean? Maybe if they did a better job promoting, I feel like I only saw one trailer for this, and there was no other, like, marketing or promotion. Like, I didn't find out most of the cast until, like, the day before I saw the movie. I was like, who else is in this movie? And I saw, oh my god, Coleman Domingo, Toni Collette, are you kidding? You know what I mean? It was kind of wild to figure that out. And this movie, I really do think this movie is just getting just thrown out, and that's kind of a shame. Even if it isn't my favorite thing in the world, I don't really think I liked it. If I'm being honest with you, it's not really my cup of tea. But it is a shame that, something that seems like it would be a surefire hit, an animated, family-friendly movie, and it's a pretty low budget considering, Elemental just debuted with $200 million, and that's a dud. You know what I mean? This is maybe an even bigger dud. You know what I mean? And that's a bummer. Moving on to number 7, which is The Little Mermaid, making $5.1 million, adding to a domestic total of $280, so still $54 million behind Alice in Wonderland. Worldwide, it has crossed over the $500 million threshold, now sitting at $523 million, so you can technically say now that they have doubled their $250 million budget. It still needs $19 million until it outgrosses the Cinderella remake from Kenneth Branagh, so still hasn't made any other, progress there. It's just kind of, that's the thing, is that it's had like solid enough holds. Like initially it had a drop off because there was a new movie. What came out after Little Mermaid? I don't even remember, oddly enough, but it got knocked down. But it was still able to hang around a little bit too. It was like, okay, yeah, it can still kind of hang out and, make its money. It's not going to be a big Beauty and the Beast or Jungle Book kind of success, but it was able to not have like significant drop-offs like our number 8, which we'll get to in a second. So it's kind of impressive in that regard, but I would argue it's not that impressive since the thing that I always say is that even when you get these numbers, this $250 million budget, usually that can mean that they need a lot more, especially since this is a number that you can see copy and pasted for a lot of other Disney productions like your Guardians 3 or Black Panther Wakanda Forever or Thor Love and Thunder or Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny if you just add another $50 million to it, you know what I mean? So yeah, moving on to number 8 though. The Flash, the biggest loser of them all, arguably, and I think maybe definitively, made $5 million, adding to a domestic total of $99 million. Jesus Christ, they still can't even scrape into the 100 millions. It is 41 million behind Shazam. For Andy Muschietti, it is behind It 2 by 112 million. Worldwide, it is sitting at $244 million, so that it's at least 24 million over the initial production budget of 220 million, but because of the reshoots and delays, who knows how much more they actually need to be considered a success. There's, reports flying around that overall, when it's all said and done, when the run concludes, this will still lose 200 million for Warner Brothers. So it just makes you think, I am not for the scrapping of Batgirl. I was never for, I hate that happened. But if you were going to scrap that one because of potentially just Michael Keaton connection going in a direction with the universe they were never going to stick to with the new leadership, why didn't you also just cut this as well? Because it's so much riskier in every single way, it seemed, and it cost a lot more than Batgirl. So, if you are going to write something off for taxes by canceling it, this would have been a pretty high one to send off. I'm just saying. It still needs 119 million until it outgrosses Shazam worldwide, and 223 million until it outgrosses It 2 for Andy Muschietti. Very interesting that the one that is being seen as like this is the reset point for the DCEU, and people early on were saying like it's one of the best comic book movies ever, can't outgross Shazam 1. Let's move on to number 9, which is Asteroid City, which it's such a bummer that it had like a really great weekend for Wes Anderson's entire filmography last weekend, and then immediately they announce like, oh, it's coming to digital like in 2 weeks. It's like, stop undercutting your successes and like potential good cinema runs with these new and immediate digital releases, like, God, it's so annoying. It still made $3.8 million this weekend, adding to a domestic total of $18 million. So that's $7 million over Darjeeling Limited, $1 million over Rushmore, and $2 million over The French Dispatch for Wes Anderson. It needs $3 million until it outgrosses Fantastic Mr. Fox. Worldwide, it is sitting at $29 million, so that is $10 million over Rushmore, and it needs $5 million until it outgrosses Life Aquatic at this point. It has crossed the initial production budget of $25 million, but double it in order to be considered a success. They would still need $21 million in order to get there, and I'm not sure, unless worldwide it really does bump up, but I'm not sure it has the hold domestically anymore, which is a huge bummer. But I mean, what else can you expect at this point with the with audience mentality, and also the way studios just undercut the releases by putting it on digital, and lack of significant marketing, blah 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 blah. You've heard it all before. Let's close out the video with number 10, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, making 1.8 million, adding to a domestic total of 354 million. So it's ending its run still behind Volume 2. It was not able to outgross it there domestically, neither worldwide. It is at 827 million. It still needs 42 in order to outgross it there. And for the MCU, it needs 23 million until it outgrosses Thor Ragnarok. So even though it didn't get to Volume 2, which early on we were kind of expecting because the opening weekends was right between the first one and the second one, it still had a tremendous hold from week to week. The critical response was so great from the audience and the critics' perspectives. You know, and it lasted in the top 10 for this long. It didn't drop off immediately like The Flash. You know, I think this is still an absolute win. They tripled their $250 million budget. So, you know, these Guardians of the Galaxy movies have never reached, you know, $1 billion. But I feel like, you know, they've always been a success. Not just financially, but just personally with the viewers. You know, this is the stuff that people will remember and be inspired by. So I'm just very thankful for for its lasting impact on the top 10 for these last couple weeks, and just overall I'm thankful for James Gunn for making them and for being rehired in the first place so he can finish this trilogy, because, you know, I think the most important thing, despite any box office talk, I know that's the point of the show, but despite any box office talk, it's what does a movie personally mean to you? How does that affect you? And, you know, all three of these movies that James has made have personally affected me in ways I didn't even, you know, think were possible. So I just think that's really special. Just wanted to say that really quick since it's probably its last time here. And yeah, I just love this movie. Glad so many people saw it and hope people continue to see it. You know, hope the pre-order sales for the 4K Blu-ray is booming. I hope it's the #1 most watched thing on Disney Plus when it comes out. Now it's time for the fun part, the predictions for next week's Top 5. Number 1, I think I will be predicting that despite whatever drop-off it has, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny may stick it at number 1. And then number 2, I'm going with Insidious, The Red Door. The Insidious franchise has, you know, had some pretty solid opening weekends. I am curious, though, since it has been 5 years since the last one, and it has been even longer, like exactly 10 years since we've seen Patrick Wilson and his family in these movies. I do wonder if it will have like a lower opening weekend compared to the rest, or it'll be a surprise hit and overtake Indiana Jones, but I don't know. So I'm predicting it for number 2 though, because I'm just unsure. Then number 3, I think Joyride will have enough of a buzz to get there. Number 4, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, and then number 5, Elemental. But what are your predictions for next week's Top 5? Leave them in the comments below. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.